Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. Today, my guest is someone who I want to talk to for a while because he actually interviewed me, but now it's time to interview the interviewer. Ladies and gentlemen, Zack Albetta.
Hey Clayton, thanks for having me, man. Good to see
Man,
you.
you are the man with the golden voice. Every time I hear you on your podcast, I'm like, damn, I wish I had a cool voice like that.
No,
But
you got it. You got it, man.
it's like I'm trying to like compete with the coolness here, but I can't compete. Yes, I bring him on this podcast because he is the co-host. I guess, are you the founder also of Working Drummer
No,
podcast?
my partner Matt Kraus got it going about a year before I joined him. So he is founder. I am co-host.
Yes, and I was introduced to Zack in 2019 through a mutual friend of ours named Q Robinson.
Q.
And we connected because he was telling me about your podcast. And at the time, I was working on a show called Ain't Too Proud. And
Yeah, a
Q,
little upstart operation called Ain't Too Proud.
little, mom and pop thing. And I was on the show, and Q was trying to get into, he's been networking his way on the whole Broadway scene. And we connected. I connected with Zack, and he interviewed me at the very beginning of my journey with Ain't Too Proud. And I told my story, and I share it sometimes on social media. And Q wound up working his way to becoming the drummer for the first national tour. Now, Q went
Hmm.
out for a long time. And I remember hearing Q on your podcast. You interviewed him twice, actually.
Hmm.
And he was telling you the ins and outs of Broadway. And, you were asking all kind of questions. And Q left a couple months ago. And guess what? Zack Albetta is now the drummer for the first national tour of Ain't Too Proud.
Here we are.
So tell me, what's the biggest revelation that you've discovered by playing a Broadway show?
Um, one of them is that even though this is in many ways the most challenging thing I've ever done, I'm starting to see that my job on this show is like maybe one of the easiest jobs on the tour. There are so many people doing such incredible and at times superhuman stuff. Whether it's the performers on stage or the stage manager or the MD. I'm looking around at other people's job on this show, and mine looks pretty self-contained, pretty pretty simple. Um, so that's one of the big ones. Um, but another one is, and I'm still sort of settling into this, but just the consistency and focus required to perform at a high level on that kind of show every time. I've fallen short every time in some way, but usually they're little small things that maybe only I know about, or that aren't deal breakers for anyone. So yeah, like I said, it's been just a huge challenge so far. It's kicking my ass in a lot of good ways, and I'm here for it.
Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Ah,
Yeah, both my wife and I grew up there. And I went away for college and bounced around a little bit. I did my undergrad in Indiana. I then went on to graduate school in Kansas City. I then lived in LA for 5 years, and then we came to Atlanta in 2016.
so when you were younger, what was your first musical memory?
Just listening to rock and roll records that my parents had. My dad was like a huge Motown fan, R&B, and classic rock and all that kind of stuff. But I remember maybe it was Buddy Holly or something. Yeah, I mean, I remember my earliest musical memories are as a listener, which I think is probably true for most people. But yeah, and another one is a cousin of ours who we would go visit. He was like probably 10 years older than me. So when I was 3 or 4, he was kind of like a teenager, and he had a drum set. And he didn't end up becoming a drummer, but like from the word go, I was just fascinated and obsessed with that drum set. So anytime we went to visit, Uncle Joe and cousin Jesse, I was, oh, the drum set. Yeah, they're okay. Let's go.
So you got on his drum set and you were like, okay, this is what I need to do. And did anybody like say, okay, you need to take lessons? Like, what was the next transition?
I remember like pestering my parents for lessons for a long time. And I began lessons with a great teacher in Santa Fe named Jeff Sussman, who still lives there, when I was 8 years old. And to my recollection, by the time I actually started lessons, I had been hassling my parents like, I want to play drums, I want to take lessons, like, please make it happen. So they they finally did.
Were there any drummers, uh, like professional drummers that you looked up to at the time? One of the, you talked about Buddy Holly, but were there records that you was like, okay, I want to be like this guy or this
Yeah,
woman?
Ringo, like from an early stage, like the sun the sun rose and set with Ringo Starr for me. Um, uh, I discovered the Beatles at an early age, I think, like most people, and yeah, I was obsessed with Ringo. I learned every Beatles song. It was to the point where, as a kid, I wore rings on every finger. Like Ringo, like Ringo got the name Ringo because he wore a grand total of 4 rings. I think like both ring fingers and both pinkies. He had rings.
I never knew that.
I like, well, see, I was a student. I was like, which fingers has he got them on, right? But I just took it to an extreme, and I had like 8 rings, like on every finger except my thumbs. I just wore rings when I was a kid, and I would steal my mom's. Like, I didn't care whether they were like quote men's rings or women's rings or what. Like, I just put rings on. And so yeah, like Ringo was my first drumming love.
Like the Tom Brady of drums, man, just got rings.
Right, right. The Bill Russell.
Yeah, Bill. I was trying to remember who had the most rings, but yeah, Bill Russell definitely.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you talk about Ringo. Yeah, I'm assuming you're not older than I am, and a lot of younger people don't really, you know, quote Ringo as an influence until later. They like myself. I got to tell you, when I saw that documentary that came out, I don't know if you saw it, the recent one about the Beatles.
Yeah, yeah.
Let
On
it be.
Disney Plus, the
Yes.
Peter Jackson
Yeah,
thing. Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I loved it. There were, it wasn't all gold. There were some parts of it that were just kind of pedestrian, and you're watching them do their thing or whatever. But overall, um, I was just struck by like what an amazing time in music history, and what a weird time in those guys' lives. And they're to just see them like going about writing their songs, recording this record, doing that concert on the rooftop. And we know it's the last time they would play together. We know it's the last songs they're ever going to write, but they don't know it necessarily. And I mean, it's almost like watching John F. Kennedy get in the car at the beginning of the parade, like they don't know how this is going to end, and it sucks. um, but my biggest takeaway from that was like, I think late 69, early 70. And, I watched and listened to what Ringo did in that process. First of all, Ringo has the patience of a saint, because, the guys are just noodling around, dicking around, for hours and days, and Ringo is just sitting there. Like if they start playing, Ringo starts playing. What they're doing is going nowhere, but Ringo is just dutifully sort of playing time, supporting them, giving them what they need to get through this process. And like if I was sitting there, I would have been like, fellas, I'm going to lunch. You call me when you have an idea that is going somewhere, right? So, but my biggest takeaway from that was late 69, early 70, like what's going on in the rock drumming world at that time, right? John Bonham has just like exploded out of the gate and made everyone's head blow up. Mitch Mitchell is doing his thing with Jimi Hendrix. Like the rock drumming landscape is just breaking apart and shifting and
Keith Moon.
What?
Keith Moon.
Yeah, absolutely. Keith Moon. All these just explosive players, right? And Ringo is just sitting there being more Ringo than ever. Like he knows who he is, he knows what he does, he knows his role in his band, and he is so okay with it. He doesn't feel any pressure or gig envy or what, like, because we all experience this. Like we see other drummers and we're like, holy shit, I need to incorporate that into my, like, that's where drumming is going, I need to get on that tip. But Ringo is just sitting there being so Ringo in the midst of Bonham and Keith Moon and Mitch Mitchell. And, so that was a huge takeaway for that. Like, it's some Zen level shit to like be the most yourself in the midst of all of that.
Did you get into any bands when you were in junior high school? Did you have like bands that were Beatlesque?
Actually, no. I played in death metal bands when I was in high school. Like in my childhood to my early teens, I was a Beatle head. I was just all in for Ringo. But then once I got into middle school, my tastes progressed, and buddies introduced me to Guns N' Roses, and then it got heavier from there. I went into Metallica and Pantera and Rush, and like full on into like bona fide death metal, like Deicide and Morbid Angel. And so like this is the shit I was consuming, and I had a couple of different like garage bands. We had endless rehearsals, dozens and dozens of rehearsals, and like two gigs over the course of my high school tenure.
This in Santa Fe?
Yeah.
Really? Were there a lot of places to play in Santa Fe back then?
No.
Did you have long hair, and were you like,
I did. I had the skater
Really?
cut. I had like, it was like long, really long on the top and like shaved around the sides. And then I put the long hair into a ponytail and like it was kind of a very New Mexico style to put like a rubber band every couple inches down the ponytail. Like it was bad. It was pretty bad.
I've always wanted, my girlfriend likes when I grow this beard, but one thing I always kind of wanted was the long Rasputin type of beard that goes down. And
Right.
And then I could put like the guy, I think one of the guys in Slayer has it where he like puts rubber bands in his beard. I don't know if it's him or some other band like that.
No, I've seen a number of guys do that, and you have to be like, you have to be a certain kind of person to like pull that off.
Yes.
For it to not be a joke. Like if you're that kind of person, it is not a joke at all. And it's like, yes, I'm this guy.
Yeah.
What? Come at me.
Yeah, I'm not that guy, man.
Yeah, me neither.
I'm too wholesome to be like. So you left Santa Fe. You knew the way to Santa Fe, but you left, and you went to University of Indiana.
Actually, I went to Ball State in Indiana, which is kind of the second fiddle, or one, maybe third or fourth fiddle as far as universities in Indiana. But they had a strong music program, a great percussion professor there named Dr. Erwin Mueller. By the time I got to college, I was full on into the marimba classical route. I was playing drum set, I was playing in jazz band and jazz combo and everything, but my private study and almost all of my practice time was going into the classical side.
Did you know what you want to do professionally? Did you want to say, one day I want to play musicals?
I thought well, it wasn't musicals. At that time, I thought my career path was gonna be, audition for symphony orchestras. So probably have like some type of classical orchestra gig. Do solo marimba performance / clinic type shit at PASIC. And maybe play some jazz drums at the bar also. It was kind of a vague idea of what I wanted my career to be like. But about halfway through grad school, like I was just about done with my master's degree in classical music, and I kind of realized like I don't want to do this. Like my first love is the drum set. I never left it, but I want to refocus my time and my attention and my career around the drum set.
What made you decide to get a master's degree?
The idea, well, partly the idea that I could teach at the collegiate level with an advanced degree. But also that was kind of the path that a lot of people followed, and I kind of naively just went along with it. I wasn't. I think subconsciously I knew that I wasn't really ready to like get out and hustle and not have sort of the safety net and the cocoon of school around me. So that was part of it. And the other thing was, I saw going to grad school in a big city as sort of an intermediate step towards being out on my own. Like if you go to grad school, or even if you go to undergrad in a big city with a thriving music scene, it's often very easy to matriculate into that city's professional scene.
Where was your grad school again?
Kansas City. University of Missouri, Kansas City. I entered there in the classical program, and I did finish that degree. But like I said, I kind of towards the end of that degree, I realized like this classical thing isn't really who I am. I had been playing in the jazz department. Bobby Watson ran the jazz department there. He's a former jazz messenger, musical director for Art Blakey, alto sax god. And I loved Bobby, and I still love Bobby. And so my decision to sort of refocus on drum set went along with like, well, maybe I should just stay in school some more, get another degree, and spend more time with Bobby. So I got after my Master of Music in Classical Performance, I stayed on and got a Master of Arts in Jazz and Studio Performance. And that wasn't about the piece of paper, really. That wasn't about the credential. It was just about the time with Bobby and the experience in that department.
If you were to do this all over again, would you move to LA and keep your hair out and try to be in a death metal band, or would you have gone the same route? Like looking back, would you like, what, did I waste my time doing this, or was it a good enough experience where you'd say, yeah, I'd do it all over again?
I go back and forth because even though I didn't end up being a classical musician, I feel like there are just so many skills, so many musical skills and musical languages that I learned that I still use, at least in an indirect way. I would have, I'm still carrying student loan debt from my undergrad. So one thing that I would definitely do differently is, work more and spend less in my undergrad years. But it's hard to say. I'll tell you one thing. I do not regret for a second spending all the time that I spent in Kansas City. Because there were some things about school that I look back on and I put a lot of time into things that I don't really do anymore. But I consider Kansas City my second home. I spent 4 years in grad school there. I spent 3 years beyond that. So I spent a grand total of 7 years, most of my 20s in Kansas City. It's where I grew up. Like, it's where I kind of became an adult musically. It's where I learned how to be a professional. It's where I learned, it's where I formed, you know, a couple of the relationships that I have to this day that are my closest, oldest personal and musical relationships. And the music scene, the music community in Kansas City kind of showed me what it's supposed to be like, what it's supposed to feel like as part of a scene.
So you left there. Usually people after college or after high school or when they want to embark on a professional career, they move to LA, Nashville, New York.
Mm-hmm.
You chose, I guess, LA.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the thinking behind that?
At the time, my best friend from high school, a gal named Christina McIntosh, lived in LA. She had left New Mexico and gone to a job in LA. So the whole time I was in Kansas City, like she had moved to LA. So I had visited her there a couple times. And I, you know, like, I looked at New York. I was like, there's just no way. I'm not cut out for this city. And part of me, there was kind of imposter syndrome. Like, at the time I was like deep in the jazz thing in Kansas City, but the idea of going to New York, like, it's the NFL of jazz. Right. And I just didn't feel like I was quite there. So, you know, and I also wanted to branch out and do more than jazz. And LA just seemed like, you know, a bunch of wide open possibilities. So I had visited Christina there. I kind of set my sights on it. And in, what was it? Spring, or it was 2009. I said, okay, if by October 2010, I gave myself like a year plus to kind of like close out the Kansas City chapter and get ready to go to LA. I said, okay, by October 2010, I'm out of here. And by October 2010, I was out of there, and Christina and I were in love. So I was not only going to start a new career in LA, I was starting a new relationship. So that's why that's why life pointed me towards LA.
So you moved to LA. What do you do in order to meet people in a big city like that?
I did it wrong. And like, I've talked about this on the podcast. Like, they ask me, like, what's LA like? What's the scene like? And I tell them, if you're an extrovert with a short attention span, you'll do great. Meaning you have to be outgoing. You have to be like, you have to show up, you have to talk to people, you have to be upbeat and positive and kind of like be able to switch gears fast. And I am not any of that. I am not. Between the fact that I'm kind of an introvert and the fact that I had a pretty healthy ego on me because of the sort of the status that I had reached on the Kansas City scene, I showed up in LA and I kind of expected LA to come to me. You know, I would go to jam sessions, I would go to people's gigs, and just really not talk very much to anybody and not interact and just kind of like stand in a corner and look around and be like, well, who can I talk to? I don't know that person. I feel like I've seen that. Like, I wasn't outgoing. And it didn't it didn't help. You know, over time I managed to be a little more extroverted and to do some social and professional legwork and create some relationships. And but if I had to do that over again, I would have definitely kicked my own ass more to get outside my comfort zone, get out there more often, and just be more proactive in terms of establishing myself on that scene.
Do you feel that you've evolved and you're more extroverted now, or do you just feel different when you're speaking to other drummers?
I've gotten better at doing an extrovert impression. Like I'm no less an introvert than I've always been. And we've talked about this on the podcast quite a bit also. I think most musicians are introverts, and I think most drummers especially are introverts. And you know, we have to learn how to do a good extrovert impression, whether it's in terms of, you know, being on the scene and meeting people and creating relationships, or in terms of performing. I think the reason we are drummers is because it's at the back of the stage and we're behind this fortress of wood and metal, and we don't have to sing unless we really, really want to, and we don't have to interact with the crowd unless we really, really want to. Doing the interviews on the podcast has been really helpful for me, just to be, like I said, to be outgoing, to take interest in people, to make them feel comfortable. It still takes effort. A buddy of mine described introverts versus extroverts perfectly. He said, it's like social interaction for an extrovert is a deposit, right? It fills them up. But for an introvert, social interaction is a withdrawal. It's an extraction. So it's not that, like, as an introvert, it's not that I don't like talking to people and being around people. And it's not that I'm not good at it. It's that I have to gear up for it and then recover from it. Whereas an extrovert, the interaction is the fill up, like that is the juice. They don't have to recover from it. They look forward to it because it's going to fill their tank. For me, it empties my tank, and I have to fill it by being alone and quiet for a while.
Interesting. That's a very interesting concept. You stayed out in LA for a while. Did you move to Atlanta after that experience?
Yes. So by this time, Christina and I are married. She got kind of an unsolicited job offer. She got headhunted by a firm here in Atlanta. Her first reaction was like, "Fuck no, I'm not moving to Atlanta. What do I know about Atlanta?" But the more we learned about it, the better it started to look. She was super sick of LA. I was starting to get sick of it. And I was doing okay professionally. I wasn't setting it on fire, but I had sort of a sustainable, stable playing existence there. But nothing, there wasn't anything going on for me that was like really worth staying for. Pretty quickly, we just sort of said, like, fuck it, let's go. Atlanta seems great. It seems awesome. And if it ends up not being awesome, we'll move back to Kansas City. But yeah, we've been here for 7 years. We bought a house not long after we moved here. And the scene here has been great. It really, it put its arms around us musically and otherwise as soon as we got here.
So the biggest difference between Atlanta's music scene and LA's music scene is?
I think soul, soul and grease and dirt. And, LA's music scene, it's LA in general is just the entertainment industry town. Like, and during my time there, I met and played with a great many artists and musicians of true substance. Like, it's not all vapid airheads out there in LA. Like, there are amazing people doing amazing music in LA. You can't find it. But as soon as I got to Atlanta, I was like, oh my God, everybody's greasy, everybody's funky, everybody's soulful, everybody's sort of in the moment. They're not triangulating themselves for the next gig. They're here now in the room. And that really sort of appealed to me, especially after coming off my LA experience. One of my main gigs in LA was as a staff musician at Disneyland, which is just a whole, and some overlaps with the world of musicals. The Disneyland experience was just like, there was a lot that was good about it, but coming from Buena Vista Street in California Adventure inside Disneyland to the Red Light Cafe, or one of the clubs in Atlanta was just like polar opposites. And I got to Atlanta, I was like, whoa, these people are rooted and grounded, and let me be a part of that.
I'm glad you wound up where you are now, because you met a guy named Quentin Robinson. We call him Q. How did you connect with Q?
John Sheldon is a great drummer in Atlanta, and he organized this drum event, and it was kind of, every time he did it, he'd do it every couple of months, and it was organized around a certain drummer. So like 1 month would be like Jeff Porcaro night, and the next month would be Dave Weckl night. And so for each one, he would have like a handful of drummers perform a few tunes each with like a house band, and it was just kind of a showcase. And Q was performing at one of them. I feel like it was Vinnie Colaiuta night, but I'm not sure. So this was 2018. I hadn't met Q yet, and I saw him play, and he, killed it, of course. And I didn't meet him inside. I was actually leaving. I was kind of walking through the parking lot, and Q was sitting there. I think he was waiting for a lift or something. But I just kind of went up to him and introduced myself. Again, I had learned the lesson in LA. Like, you can't expect people to come to you. You have to go to them. So I just said, well, let me just say hi to this guy and see what he's about. Maybe I'll get him on the podcast, And Q, of course, was Q, and just, I was like, oh man, this guy, like, I've got to get this guy on the podcast. He's going to talk for 3 hours, and it's all going to be gold. So yeah, like had him on the podcast not long after that, and we became friends after that. I don't become friends with everybody I interview, but Q, being the super outgoing dude he is, made an impression, and we stayed in touch, and would go for coffee, go for lunch. He would send me to sub on some gigs, and we just became friends not long after that.
So is that that drummer doing those kind of drummer nights still, or is that over with?
No, that went up until COVID, and COVID kind of killed that whole idea. He might do it again at some point, but
I think when it comes back, they should have a Ringo Starr night.
Yeah, man.
And you should be the drummer up there playing the Ringo Starr stuff with your rings, like Tom did.
Right, I'll bring back all the rings.
And your hair.
Love it.
You moved to Atlanta. You started this podcast called Working Drummer Podcast. You started before you met Q. What was the spark to say, you know what, I want to partner with this guy and start this podcast? Or he already started it and you partnered with him? Tell me about the origins of Working Drummer Podcast.
So Matt Krause, Nashville drummer, started Working Drummer Podcast in, I believe, 2015. And at the time, I was kind of writing some articles and working a little bit with Nick Ruffini of Drummer's Resource. I wasn't involved in his podcast in any way, but I was doing some written content for the website. And Nick noticed that, this new podcast called Working Drummer Podcast had gotten going. And he kind of played matchmaker. Like, he called up Matt and was like, I got this guy, Zack, who's been doing written articles that are very much in line with sort of what you're doing on your podcast, and would you want to sort of join forces and take on a co-host? And to Matt's great credit, he was totally open to it. It's still kind of mind-blowing, because if I had started a podcast and somebody had called me up and was like, here's this guy you don't know, have never met, have never heard of, you want to make him your co-host, I would have been like, I don't think so. But Matt was, totally open to it. He and I hit it off, very quickly. And by that time, I think he was about 50 episodes into Working Drummer Podcast. He was doing one a week. And I think part of the reason he was interested in taking on a partner was because the workload was kind of kicking his ass. Like, getting an episode out once a week is like, it's a lot. So yeah, I kind of came on and we just started trading off weeks. So he'd do 1 week, I'd do the next. And from the beginning and to this day, Matt focuses pretty much on the Nashville scene. He does interview folks from other places sometimes, but he covers Nashville. I cover the rest of the world. So yeah, it was a good sort, like we have a good 1-2 punch. And I think that's another reason that he was open to me coming on, because he could see that my background was very different from his in terms of the classical and jazz thing. And also I could bring a greater reach to the podcast as far as the people and the places that we could cover.
For those that don't know about it, I'm surprised you don't, but you definitely check out Working Drummer Podcast. It's amazing. Zack is a great interviewer. They have amazing drummers on it. Every time I look, I'm like, oh my God, this guy, this woman, it's incredible. So Working Drummer Podcast. Is it workingdrummerpodcast.com?
.net.
.net. Workingdrummerpodcast.net. Definitely check it out.
It might just be workingdrummer.net. I should know this like off the top of my head, but no, it is workingdrummer.net.
Workingdrummer.net.
Yeah.
You can also get the podcast on any podcast.
Yeah, Spotify, Apple, whatever.
So you meet Q, you hit it off. He's doing a bunch of things, and this is 2018, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Now 2019 comes, and I meet Q. And we hit it off, and he's like, "Man, I'll do whatever. Just I live in the Atlanta area, but I'll fly up. I'll sell for you whatever you want." And he was back and forth, and I found out, or maybe he found out about the tour, and he was interested in it, and he wound up subbing for me on Broadway and killing it. And everybody loved his playing and loved his personality. And then he winds up getting this tour, and he goes out. Were you at all thinking about Broadway in any way?
No.
Were you just looking at Q and like, man, this is kind of interesting? Or were you just like, seeing his success and just focusing on your thing? Did you ever think that you'd be where you are now?
Not for a while, no. Because I was looking at Q, sort of, making those inroads in New York with you and so many other people. He really set his sights on it and invested a lot of time and effort and money into, making inroads with the people he had to do that with in New York. So coming out of the pandemic, like I had seen what he did in New York, and I was like, I need to do that, but I wasn't thinking in terms of the New York Broadway scene. I was thinking in terms of more the Nashville touring scene. Because Matt, my co-host and partner, it lives in Nashville. A couple of my really close friends from LA now live in Nashville. A lot of drummers in Nashville know who I am because of the podcast. And I realized like I kind of have this big untapped resource up there. There didn't feel like there was a whole lot going on in Atlanta at the time. This was like a year ago. And I just kind of said, I need to do in Nashville what Q did in New York. Like I need to get up there often. I need to show my face. I need to play whatever gigs I can get up there, just start like matriculating into that scene and put myself in a position for some of the kinds of gigs that I want to do in terms of touring and recording. So I started doing that, and was feeling good about, the progress that I was making up there. And Q just kind of called me up one day and he was like, "You interested in doing this show?" Because at the time he was talking about subbing, because about 6 months ago or something, Q had a slight medical emergency that threatened to derail the show. Like he might have been out for a show or two, and as it turned out, he did not have to miss any shows. He was able to do them, but there was like a day or half a day when they were scouring the New York landscape for someone who could, fly in and do this show. And for whatever reason, everybody that they called was unable or unwilling to make it. So that got Q's wheels turning, and when Q's wheels start turning, they don't stop. So he was like, we had this situation. It ended up we didn't need a sub. I was okay, but like I need somebody sort of in place in case something like this happens again, or in case I just want to take a week off. Like I need a sub in place. So do you want to be that guy? And I said, sure. So I audited the show while they were in Atlanta. I met Smitty, the MD, and met the rest of the band, and just kind of got the lay of the land of who these folks are and what Q does on that show. And then just kind of went back to my Nashville strategy. I was like, maybe this will come through. Maybe I'll get a call from Q and I'll have to, really shed this show hard and go play it for a day or two or a week and then come back to my Atlanta life. And a couple months later, Q sort of got the opportunity to audition for Hamilton. So it went from, do you want to be a sub on this show, to I'm leaving this show. Do you want to go for it? Like, do you want to be the next drummer on this show? And that meant that I would have to put together a video audition and get the thumbs up from the MD and the contractor and the music supervisor and all that. And I hesitated. Like I kind of hedged a little bit, and I was like, yeah, I'm open to it. But very quickly it became like, no, I'm all in. Like, let's do this. Let's get this. I'm ready to push for this. Let's do it. So yeah, I put together the video audition, played 5 songs from the show, and visited the show again they were in Greenville, South Carolina, which is only about 2 hours away. So I think it was early August, I spent just 2 days kind of, showing my face again, meeting Smitty again, meeting the band again, seeing the show a couple times, sitting in on rehearsal, not sitting in terms of playing, but just like sitting next to Q. And so yeah, that legwork paid off. They liked my audition. Smitty liked me, and got the gig, man.
So what 5 songs did you showcase? Curious.
Oh man, let me see if I can remember. The opener, The Way You Do the Things You Do. The next one, Runaway Child. Cloud 9, Can't Get Next to You, and what was the 5th one? Oh, the title track, Ain't Too Proud. Ain't Too Proud to Beg. Yeah.
For drummers that don't know about Broadway tours and drummers that want to get on Broadway tours, do you rehearse with the band before you go in and take over something like this? Did you get a chance to do that?
I did. And I was fortunate. I think there are drummers, there are situations who just have to go in, almost cold, like very little, if any, rehearsal, and just, play the show. I was prepared to do that. I was shedding, my wife can tell you, I was shedding this show in this room diligently before I went to Denver. But I got a music rehearsal with not the full band, but a few members of the band. And then I got a put-in rehearsal because the cast was, they had to rehearse a handful of swings. So they did a put-in rehearsal and I got to play that rehearsal, which was basically a run-through, right? So I got kind of a play-through, talk-through with some members of the band. I got a run-through with the full cast. And then, so yeah, that, like, the music rehearsal was Wednesday, the put-in rehearsal was Friday afternoon, and I played the show for the first time on that Friday night. Playing
the same thing the same way every night, do you get bored doing this?
No. I'm still at the point where I'm trying to establish consistency with this show. It's like I said, it's a huge focus challenge to just really stay in it for an hour and 15 first half and a 1 hour second half. So yeah, this show is a lot of things. Boring is not one of them. And even, the sameness of my job from night to night doesn't really account for the differences that go on around me from night to night. Like there's a different MD tonight, right? Like Smitty is taking the night to go listen to audit the show from the audience, and Daryl, the second keyboardist, is MD tonight. So it's like, oh, holy shit, Daryl just looks and sounds different in everything he does. He does everything Smitty does. It's just like a different human on the screen there. It's oh, there's a swing in for David Ruffin tonight, or there's a different percussionist tonight. Like, these personnel switches are frequent, and I don't know I don't know if I've done, I haven't done the show that many times yet, but I don't know if I've done the show with the same group of humans twice yet. Right? There's almost always a swing stepping in for somebody. There's almost always a maybe a different, like we went through a couple of horn players and a couple of percussionists in San Francisco because of like their scheduling issues or whatever. Yeah, I mean, even though my job is the same every night, shit around me is switching up in at least some little way almost every night. So that kind of like, if you're complacent, if you're bored, that snaps you out of it. Like, oh, okay, different human in this role, pay attention to that.
So you have swings, you have different MDs, you have different musicians, and you have different venues that you're going to. Because when you get on stage at the end of the night, you see different things in the audience. How do you maintain consistency?
I've gotten a little bit spoiled because like the norm for a tour like this is one city per week, right? But because of where in the schedule I joined the tour, I had a week in Denver and then 4 weeks in San Francisco. I haven't yet experienced kind of the week in, week out, different city, different theater, different group of people in the band every week. Because for those who don't know, like we travel with a core band of 5. We have MD, second keyboard, guitar, bass, and drums. And in every city locally, we hire 3 horns, 2 strings, and 2 percussion. So, the normal rhythm for this show is for just a completely different group of humans every week in the band. And like you said, a different theater, a different room, a different city, a different climate, a different hotel room, whatever. But I got to sit down in San Francisco for 4 weeks and really kind of make it my home for a bit.
So you're on tour with Ain't Too Proud. If there's any advice that you'd give to someone that wants to do what you're doing right now, what do you recommend them doing?
Anything they can, really. I mean, whatever your goal is, you have to sort of take advantage of even the smallest step in that direction. Playing a Broadway tour or a Broadway show wasn't my goal for most of my life. Playing musicals, being involved in musical theater is something that I've really loved and really enjoyed and done throughout my career. So I discovered that I had a love and a passion and a good skill set for musical theater. So whether it was in high school or college or at the Kansas City Repertory Theater or for Center Theater Group in LA or Musical Theater West, like there are so many opportunities to be part of musical theater short of Broadway, whether it's local or regional or at your school or whatever. So pursue those opportunities, cultivate those experiences, but also you got to be a musician first. You can't just be a musical theater musician. And I heard I was watching some clips of your show on Instagram, and I heard Jared Schoenig
Yes.
talk about, go out and gig, like not just in musical theater, like in the bars, at wedding gigs. Like his point was that most of the music in musical theater is based on or derived from pop music or some form of music, some genre that is its own thing out in the world. So whether it's jazz or hip hop or classic rock or pop or whatever, like the more playing experience you can get just out in the world, being a musician, the better equipped you're going to be to tackle a given show in musical theater. And I think, first of all, I before I go on, I want to say that I really appreciate you having me on, because I very much consider myself a rookie in this world. I've played a ton of musicals. I've done a ton of shows, but this is my first experience like in the Broadway world on a Broadway tour. So that said, you know way more about this than I do, but it seems to me that the Broadway world is starting to value musical authenticity in terms of certain genres and certain types of players more than it used to. And that means that more and different types of players are showing up in pits. Musical theater experience and Broadway experience in particular is still extremely important, but I think a higher premium is starting to be placed on a given player's pedigree, not just in musical theater, but in music. So, the more you can equip yourself and really sort of refine your musical pedigree, I think the more attractive you're going to be to musical supervisors and MDs and performers. That's the other thing. I think, the performers on stage, the actors, are also, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, coming from a wider array of backgrounds. They're not all coming out of musical theater school. It's not all this sort of conveyor belt. They're singer-songwriters in their own right. They're doing different kinds of performances. It's a much more varied pool that performers are coming from, whether they're actors or musicians. Be a real musician in the real world. Don't get wrapped around the axle inside a theater. If all you're studying is the show, if all you're studying is sort of the musical theater repertoire, that it's not bad per se, but from the drumming standpoint, if you don't go to the source of that music, then the best you can hope to be is like a copy of a copy. If you don't study the original recordings of this stuff and the artists who invented the shit, then it's going to be hard to really make it come off the way it's supposed to in the musical theater idiom, or not idiom, in the musical theater. It's like any other sort of area in music. You're not going to be cut out for every single thing. In the non-musical theater world, you reach a point where you kind of see the genres and the artists and the bands and the fellow musicians that you're like, yeah, that's what I'm made of. That's in me. That's what I want to do. And then you also, just by definition, you look at others and you're like, yeah, that's not in me. It's not bad. It's not that I think it's not worth doing. It's just, it's not who I am. It's not what I'm made of. Sort of projecting forward about what I'm going to do in this world. Like, I'm spoiled in terms of like, the first Broadway tour that I'm doing is with music that is like part of my blood type, music that my dad played when I was a kid, that's part of the American pop songbook. It just does it get better than the Temptations? It does not. So this music like really connects with me. And I think about like what other shows would I want to do? If I do a show after this, if I'm fortunate enough to get offered something else, I feel like it's going to have to be something like the music of that show is going to have to speak to me and connect with me in the same way that this music is, especially on a tour. Like if I'm doing a tour for a year or something, like it's got to be music I give a shit about. So the music in some shows is that, and the music in some other shows is not. So we'll jump off that bridge when we come to it. But that's something in the back of my mind. Like I have to match myself with a show that is in me.
Well, I have an idea. The show called Tomorrow Never Knows.
Yeah.
The Ringo Starr musical, and you are going to be the drummer.
I'm in, man. Call up Kenny Seymour or somebody. Let's get it.
You know that picture of Bill Walton with his rings like this? That's going to be you with the Ringo Starr musical without you.
I'm there, man. Put me in that Sgt. Pepper coat. I'm ready.
So Zack Albetta, the co-host of one of the best podcasts on the planet, is part of a group of podcasts. I can't remember what the 5 podcasts are called again. The Big 5.
It's the Drum Click Network. About a year ago, we banded together with 4 other podcasts to form the world's first and only drum podcast network. And it's us, Working Drummer Podcast, Big Fat 5 with Ben Hilsinger, Drum History with Bart Vanderzee, Backstage with Sarah Hagen, and Drum Candy with Mike Dawson.
Just fascinating stuff. So everyone check out Drum Candy, Backstage, Drum History, Big Fat 5, and most importantly, Working Drummer Podcast with your host, Golden Throat himself, Zack Albetta.
I know we're about to wrap up, but I do want to say, like, I'm looking forward to going to pretty much every city because there's something cool about almost everywhere. Like, these days with hipster culture taking hold, there is almost always a great brewery and a great coffee shop in the tiniest of towns. Some of the places on the tour I've been to before, but a lot of them I have not, and I'm just really looking forward to taking in the full spectrum of American life here.
I wish you the best, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you for watching the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube channel. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on that bell icon so that you'll be notified when a new video is released.